Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset with you. Very exciting episode today. We got a lot of good things to talk about today. Leading off, we're going to get into softball and the huge news there. And then we're going to dive back into our looking at former Marshall football coaches series that we've been doing. And we're going to go to the man that really is the one that was the most integral part of setting up Marshall for the major success that it had in the late 90s and early 2000s, because he's the one that started it, being Jim Donnan, College Football Hall of Famer. We'll get into all that later, but we got a lot to get into today, and it should be a really good episode. But before we get too deep into it, how's it been going for you here, man?
Been doing good, and like we kind of talked about before we started recording here just a second ago, this is going to be a really interesting episode. Whenever you look at all of the numbers and all that Jim Donnan was able to do while he was here, he makes a very, very strong case for GOAT status here at Marshall. So, I'm interested to see how our conversation goes. It's going to be a really good episode, and I cannot wait to dive into the legacy that Jim Donnan left here at Marshall.
Absolutely. And once you start getting into, like we've talked about before, once you start getting into those older years, 1AA Southern Conference years, you really start, it's harder to find a lot of information because the internet just wasn't, like, they don't have a lot of that stuff out here that easily accessible compared to other eras more recently. But there's a lot to talk about with the Jim Donnan era. And I've found some nice pieces of reading material to help do some research on that era and beyond, actually. But we'll get into that eventually. But going to be interesting to see where the conversation takes us there, because like you said, he's got a case for being as good as or possibly better, depending on who you ask, than any coach that we've ever had. So it's going to be a really good conversation. But we have to start with the biggest news over the last few days, being the fact that despite a very poor finish in the Sun Belt tournament, a 6-0 loss to Coastal Carolina in the Sun Belt tournament, softball team still manages to make the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2017. Matter of fact, now Morgan Zirkle was a player on the last team that made it, and now she's the coach for the team that made it. So very cool full circle moment there. Herd ended up with a 37-17 record. Like I said, did not end the season very well, and everybody would, she'd be the first to tell you that. Bad loss there in the quarterfinals, but still 37-17. Ranked number 28 in the RPI. They were the highest ranked team in the Sun Belt in RPI rankings. One of 3 Sun Belt teams, along with South Alabama and Texas State, to make it to the NCAA tournament. So very exciting there for the Sun Belt. The Herd is an at-large, of course. They play Friday at 2:30 against the 6th seed Arizona in Durham. So they're going to be painting Duke blue. It's going to be green that day. There's going to be a bunch of green down there, no doubt about it. So they got a really good draw, I think. I mean, any team that they're going to play at this point is going to be good or really good. So you can't really expect much there difference. But as far as the location, you could not have gotten a whole lot better, in my opinion. I mean, that's an easy trip for Herd fans to make. They've gone to Carolina for many games in the past: football, basketball, soccer, and Marshall fans like traveling down there. So it's not a big deal. So talk a little bit about just the upcoming NCAA tournament matchup, and what do you think? You think they got a chance to turn it on? I know they got to start playing better than they have been playing, but still a very exciting big moment for the program to get back. So talk a little bit about the whole thing there.
Yeah, I mean, this is gigantic news. This is not something that happens every single day. And so, we've given her flowers already, but hats off to Morgan Zirkle and all of her assistant coaches. The program that they're building there is just really unbelievable. And it's one that's built up on sustaining success. Softball is wonderful in the fact that, right now it's not necessarily one of the top tier, I guess you could say, sports that, colleges are focusing a lot of time, effort, money on right now. So when we talk about the transfer portal and whatnot, there's not as much money to be had with the softball program. So that means that a lot of the girls that we see that are very successful are usually going to stay. There's outliers, of course, but for the most part, and the majority of them will stay with Marshall. So that's great. That's fantastic news, and that just gives you even more excitement for the future because what they're building is something that is going to last long term.
Yeah.
And I will say this too that I think our leadership right now is forward thinking and. They're going to be able to put in the proper amount of money towards the softball program with expansion of the dot and different things. And so, this is a very exciting time for Marshall, for the women's softball program, for softball fans in general. Like you said a moment ago, Marshall is going to travel incredibly well on Friday. That's just how it is. When every time that Marshall plays anywhere in North Carolina, there's so many alumni that live in the Charlotte area, also in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area too. That'll be no problem. People
Yeah.
will come, they'll support. It should be a really, really good atmosphere. My fear with the program though right now with the team is the fact that they've been limping the last couple of weeks. Had a
Yeah.
really bad series to end the year with James Madison coming here to Huntington, and then just a really awful performance with against Coastal Carolina in the Sun Belt Championship. So they're limping into this. I was hoping that they would have put up a better fight in the Sun Belt Conference tournament. I'm really thankful that they did get the opportunity to play and have an opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament here. I think that is a great accomplishment and something that I don't know if I was expecting it. I was hoping for it.
Yeah.
But it really could have gone either way, just how they performed the last couple of weeks. So we'll see how they do. I hope they're able to turn things around. Pitching's not been the problem. It's just simply getting runners in scoring position, then hitting them in. And that is the danger, like we kind of talked about this last week with a power hitting team. Whenever you look at the stat line and they're winning, by 8 runs and 6 of those runs came off of single home runs, well, that's great and all. But whenever you don't have those days where you're just hitting the ball out of the ballpark, you're going to struggle. And that's what we've been seeing. So hopefully they're able to turn some things around, get some runners in scoring position and hit some people back home. And we'll just have to see. But no matter what, huge accomplishment and very proud of Morgan Zirkle, proud of the ladies on the team, the staff, everyone involved with the softball program. And it should be a fun atmosphere on Friday.
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, I don't know how many fans to expect down there, but I would imagine, there'll be a couple thousand at least, probably. I don't know what kind of crowd I don't honestly know what kind of crowds NCAA tournament softball games get, but I would imagine Marshall's going to be very, very well represented. So I'm excited to see that. And like you said, even if they do lose the first game, which we obviously aren't hoping for that, but even if they did, this is still a great accomplishment for the program. This is a great accomplishment for the university. It's just a good look. When you get a team playing for the big prize, when you get a team to that level, that just doesn't happen every year for Marshall in any sport. Well, unless it's men's soccer, but pretty much every other sport, yeah, they don't have that. So it's exciting to see them back in that position. Hopefully they can take advantage of it, get a big win. Arizona is obviously going to be the favorite on paper, but the fact that we're going to have basically home field advantage and the fact that we're going to come out really fired up and looking to right the wrong from the recent few games where we haven't played very well, that might bode well for us. I don't know. We're going to have to see how it plays out, but I'm very excited for them. That's a great accomplishment, like we've said. And the program's heading in a great direction, and it's still pretty early on too. So they got a lot more going. They got a lot more building to do, and they're going to be really good. So excited for them, no doubt. We'll keep an eye on what they do there in Durham. But before we get on to the next portion, talking about Jim Donnan a little bit, well, a lot. Before we get into that, we got to talk about baseball because they've had some games coming up. Well, they've had some games recently. And they had one game coming up that where they were supposed to have, and then we got a chicken crap move from the ACC's Hokies there. We'll get into that. But over the last week or so, they had a predictable 7-2 loss to WVU. Nobody was shocked by that. And then they had 3 games. The 3-game ends up being their final homestand of the year, 3 games against Louisiana Monroe. Did manage to finally get off the losing streak in terms of Sun Belt series. They got 2 out of 3 from Louisiana Monroe, beat them 7-4 in game 1, beat them 13-10 in game 2, but then they did lose 7-5 in game 3, so they missed out on the sweep. but they did get the series win, which is important. So they're currently set at 23-28 overall, 13-14 in the Sun Belt. So they positioned themselves where they could still have they really should make the Sun Belt tournament as long as they don't get like swept or something coming up. I don't know. It's still, there's still a lot to be worked out there, but they were originally supposed to have played at the time of this recording tonight at home against Virginia Tech. And this is like the fourth or fifth time in the last few years that they've canceled on us with no reschedule. It's just like, we got to stop scheduling them. I mean, that's just no excuse for that. I don't care what it is. Like, you should not have that much control, and just say, oh yeah, we don't want to lose to you because it might hurt our RPI, so we're not going to play you. Well, guess what? You've already lost to us, so it doesn't even matter. we beat the brakes off of them in Blacksburg a couple months back. So unfortunate there, because that would have been their last home game, and now they got to go the last 3 games of the regular season on the road at Texas State, May 14th through 16th to close out the regular season. Really need to get another series win there. I mean, at least 2 wins would be fantastic there. It's going to be tough. That's a long road trip. You know, that's not really the most inviting atmosphere to play in. So they got a lot to accomplish here to try to make that Sun Belt tournament. So talk a little bit about baseball, whatever you want to go with. If you want to crap on Virginia Tech, keep doing that too.
Yeah, Virginia Tech. I mean, the reason that they kind of gave for backing out was basically like, hey, if we lose, we might not be able to make it into the NCAA tournament. To my understanding, like, that's literally what they came out with, and that's crazy. That's just absolutely wild that a ACC program would be terrified of coming to play at little old Sunbelt Marshall. That's even having a terrible season, really. I mean, not terrible, but not great either.
Not great.
So, that's just kind of comical almost that they wouldn't want to come up and try and play and different things. I just don't understand. If you're ever scared about your opponents, why schedule them in the first place?
Right.
Do the WVU thing and just don't play if you're that scared about losing to Marshall. So, anyway, that's neither here nor there. Everything else, with Virginia Tech, I appreciate them. Their baseball, like you said, they have canceled on us for a couple of different things. That's just not a great look. I doubt we'll ever get football again after beating them, but that's disappointing, obviously. And this would have been the last home game of the entire season. So to miss out on that just randomly, that's also something that I think is a shame. I feel bad for our fans. I feel bad for our players because, a week ago they had the expectation of, hey, I got the seniors or those who will leave or whatever. We got one more game at the Jack. Everything's going to be all right, blah, blah, blah. But not going to happen. And it is what it is. Moving on, Marshall's got to win. They just got to win. They have to win this next series and, to just get a chance to make it to the Sun Belt Conference Tournament. And, truthfully, if they're able to do that, it's been a disappointing season, but it will not be a failure of the season if they can make it. I don't have any expectations. I don't think that they will maybe even win a game or series in the Sun Belt tournament. I could be wrong. I hope I am. But anything can happen. It's baseball. But there's no great expectations from this team. They've underachieved, I think. We had a lot of expectations coming into the year, a lot of hope, a lot of excitement, lots of, this could be really the season that turns things around for the program and makes us a contender. And but it's just not there yet. There's still some building blocks that need to be ironed out, I guess. And I still have faith in Greg Beals. I think he's a fantastic manager. I think he's doing a great job. I think he's recruiting well and different things too. So, I don't think that he is the problem. I can't really pinpoint any one thing. It's just a collective of things coming together that have created the season that we are seeing at the moment. So we'll just have to see. Hopefully they're able to get this last series win and kind of sneak into the Sun Belt Conference Tournament. And once you get there, you just never know. Again, as a fan, knowing what the team's done this year, may not have a great expectation, but baseball is baseball and it's unforgiving and it makes no sense sometimes. So, if there's ever a time for this team to get hot at a certain portion of the season, man, it'd be a fantastic time to get hot. So we'll just have to wait and see how things go this weekend, and hopefully they're able to get a series win at the bare minimum, hopefully a sweep, really. That's what they need, is a sweep. And they'll get in that tournament, and then anything can happen from there. So always rooting for the baseball team, even though it was a little bit of a disappointing season.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not, things just haven't gone our way this year. It's just kind of certain times you just have that. I mean, even in football, certain years, where we've had big expectations, things just didn't work out certain years. And, and we're not, like we've talked about numerous times on here, baseball, the program has not reached its full potential yet. So there's still a lot to work out there. I mean, it was a program that had been just pretty much a doormat for a long time. I mean, that's pretty much what they had been. And, Greg Beals is turning them around slowly but surely. He is getting a more stable program built. It's not going to happen overnight. Last year was a big step in the right direction. And, depending on how they close out this season, this could be another big step in the right direction. It just depends on how they close it out. So it's baseball. Anything can happen. Like you said, we'll see what they do. But I still think Greg Bills is going to get it done. It's just, it might not be as fast as some people want it, but hopefully they can get it started here and close out the regular season on a high note and get to that Sun Belt tournament, but we'll see what they do. And with that being said, it is time to move on to our latest coach that we're going back and looking at his tenure as head coach of the Thundering Herd football program. And when you talk about Marshall football, one of the first things that everybody talks about is they won more games in the 1990s than any other college football program in the country. And the man that literally started that and built up to where Bob Pruitt was able to take over for is Jim Donnan. If it wasn't for Jim Donnan, Bob Pruitt does not have the success that he has. And I think that's a fact. He totally just completely changed turned the program around to a major powerhouse at the 1AA FCS level. He was a guy that had been waiting a while to be a head coach, and he finally got his opportunity. He made the most of it. So looking at the situation of when he was hired, Jim Donnan was hired on January 19th, 1990. He replaced George Chomp, who had left for Navy to be their head coach, who had a lot of success for us from 1986 to 1989. Chomp went 33-16-1 and got him to the 1987 1AA title game before they lost by 1 point. So he had really turned them around big time. So you knew he was probably going to bounce at some point. And he did. He went to Navy, became the head coach there. He also had a share of the 1988 Southern Conference title, their first conference title in probably 50 years at that point. I mean, it had been a long time. So a lot of success that they had not been used to having because of George Chomp. And Jim Donnan is the guy that gets to fill his shoes. And looking at Donnan's past a little bit, most recently, before he became head coach at Marshall, he was the offensive coordinator for one of the most vaunted programs in the country, the Oklahoma Sooners, from 1985 to 1989. And from 85 to 88, he was the offensive coordinator for Barry Switzer, one of the greatest coaches of all time. And while he was at Oklahoma, they had 49 wins and a national championship. So the guy was waiting to get his chance, and he got it. He was also an assistant at Kansas State, Missouri, Florida State, North Carolina State, and North Carolina. So he had been all over, absolutely all over it by that point. He actually went to NC State, and that's where he graduated from. So he was an obvious guy that was going to take over and do good things. I think everybody could see that. I mean, he had a lot of hype around him, and the Marshall program for the first time in probably decades was actually in a position to succeed. And they had not been in that for a while. And he ended up coaching 6 seasons for the Herd from 1990 to 1995. We'll go each year, we'll break down each year. I'll just do them in duos. But before we really look at these years, just talk about, I know we talk about we're young, don't age shame us. We weren't there for this stuff, but talk a little bit about what would have been the impression, do you think would have been the impression from Herd fans whenever Jim Donnan was hired? What do you think they were going through at that point?
Well, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about because, as you mentioned a moment ago, Coach Chomp did a fantastic job at Marshall. He's really one of the he's kind of the guy that brought them to a brand new level that the university had never been at before in really all of its history. Going to a national championship, not winning it, but still just being there after decades and decades and decades of just awful. So, I mean, that's a big deal. And so, to see him leave, I'm sure that was like, oh, here we go again. Or, maybe we're going to fall back into irrelevancy. But, hats off to the hiring committee, those that were in charge at the time at the university, to be able to be forward thinking. As you mentioned, Jim Donnan at the time was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, which, I mean, that's just one of the premier programs in all of the country. He notably was able to bring in the wishbone triple option at Oklahoma and just revolutionized everything. 85 was the year that they won the national championship. That was Jim Donnan's first year there. And so, I mean, he got to sit under Barry Switzer, got to coach alongside of Barry Switzer. And in some cases, he was the very piece that was needed to kind of elevate Barry Switzer over the top and giving them a powerful offense. So, I don't think Herd fans were weeping for long. Of course, you don't want to see that head coach leave, but to find a new guy coming in that comes from Oklahoma, that had a pedigree that he's had. I mean, you mentioned a couple things. He is a graduate assistant at NC State. He spent time at Florida State, North Carolina, Kansas State, Missouri, and Oklahoma too. So, I mean, he definitely was no slouch. And I would dare say that whenever they brought him in, there was a new sense of excitement for a lot of reasons, really, because whenever you did bring him in, there also was the project that was revealed of the Jones C. Edwards Stadium. And so, I mean, we'll talk about this, and I've got a couple thoughts on it really as well. But, the second year of Coach Donnan, new coach, brand new stadium, and really what we would come to find is a brand new way to look at the program of Marshall. So it was a fantastic hire, and you mentioned it. He is the guy that set up this entire program into the success that we saw. And whenever we talk about the greatest of all time at Marshall, I kind of feel like Jim Donnan is the least talked about, especially from the generation that is like our age, because, he was kind of out of sight, out of mind, really, a lot, he was there a long time before we were ever thought of. But really looking at all of the things he was able to do, as we'll get into it, it's really difficult for me not to look at him in a light of, man, he really could be the best of all time. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about him. And I really appreciate this too, about just kind of a prerequisite. The way that he recruited was a fantastic way. He talks about this, but, he had a plan. I want to be a regional recruiter. So he recruited heavily West Virginia. He recruited Pennsylvania, Ohio, the surrounding areas very, very well. And that's where you're going to find some of the legends of Marshall football. Michael Payton was from Pennsylvania. Mike Bartram was from Ohio. And these different guys came in that would, be developed here, eventually go to the NFL. We're all really from the region of this Appalachia in general. Yeah. And so he came in with a great plan, with the idea of, hey, there's talent in these hills, and we're going to go out, we're going to get them, we're going to bring them in, and we will develop these young men into fantastic football players. And so, that worked tremendously. It defined Marshall football in that era and really set up the defining factors of what Marshall football was going to be forever, right? Even now, the reason why we think Marshall football the way that we do is linked back to what Jim Donnan started. So definitely an all-time great, and definitely a tremendous hire from Marshall. Just a fantastic, fantastic hire overall.
I mean, I truly don't think they could have probably hired any better at that point. I mean, and that's what, as we've talked about this just in the last few minutes, it kind of makes me wonder how they were actually able to hire him. I mean, he was such a well thought of, highly regarded assistant at like one of the blue blood programs in the country. You would have thought a lot of 1A, or FBS programs would have wanted him at that point. I don't know how Marshall was able to get him at that point, honestly, but I'm glad they did because he literally set up the program for massive success. I mean, he was the guy that did it. And that's what we're getting ready to get into now. We're going to look at, like I said, 6 years he was there. We're going to look at 2 years at a time. So just starting at 1990, his first year at the Herd, he goes 6-5. So again, a winning season in year one. And they were really close to being a lot better than that. If you look at some of their results that year, they had a big win, actually, 10-7 win over Furman at home. And at that point, Furman had a 13-game Southern Conference winning streak. Marshall snapped that. Really nice win there. He had 10 new faces defensively that year, and they ended up leading the Southern Conference in total defense, scoring defense, and passing defense with a very, very different looking unit than they had the year before. So great stuff there. They had close late losses to Georgia Southern at home, 17-14. Georgia Southern ended up going on and winning the 1AA title that year. They had a 6-point loss at home to Chattanooga, 29-23, and they had a 15-12 loss to Eastern Kentucky at home. So they were 6-5, but if you get those 3 wins, you're 9-2. You know, you're 9-2, and you're probably a pretty high seed in the playoffs. They did not make the 1AA playoffs this year. But they did have a lot that you could see was building towards the next season and beyond. Michael Payton was in at quarterback as a sophomore, played well. We knew what he was going to do the next couple years. He did big things. And that was also their final season at Fairfield Stadium. They had played at Fairfield from 1928 to 1990. 62 years they had played at Fairfield Stadium. And the last game was November 10th at home against Eastern Kentucky. That's the game they did lose by 3 points, but Eastern Kentucky in those years was a really solid, really good program. So that wasn't a bad loss. It's just unfortunately it was a loss. But like we talked about before, the next year they were heading into big things because you had the opening of, at that time, Marshall University Stadium, later known as Josie Edwards Stadium, but we're just going to call it the Joan because it sounds better. So the Joan opens up. They have a huge game in their first ever game at the Joan. They beat New Hampshire 24-23 in front of a record 33,116 fans. At that point, the biggest crowd in the history of Marshall football, at home game at least. We would have several bigger than that, obviously, in the coming years, but at that point, that was unheard of to have 30+ thousand. Then the whole 91 season, very, very good season. 11-4 overall, and they were the national runner-up. They got all the way to the 1AA championship game. They had an 8-3 regular season, had losses at App State, who was the Southern Conference champion. They lost that game 9-3. And then one loss that I know I've heard a lot of people talk about over the years because they feel like the refs screwed us, NC State. We go at NC State that year, 1A program, NC State, and they beat us 15-14. Herd actually led 14-3 in the fourth quarter. And that was I believe at that time, NC State was a top 10 ranked team in the country. And they got a lot of controversial calls, a lot of things that I've read about and have heard older fans talk about that the refs really screwed us in that one. So that could have been a monumental win at that point, but still the fact we were going to compete with that high of a caliber team shows that we were on the right direction. And then they ended up going at Chattanooga and losing as well, 38-31. So all their losses in the first couple of years, pretty much all of them were close. That could have been wins. So you knew that was a sign that they were not far away from being dominant. And they end up getting into the N1AA playoffs, like I said. First round, they beat Western Illinois 20-17. Second round, they beat Northern Iowa 41-13. And then the semifinal round, they beat Eastern Kentucky 14-7. Ended up having to go on the road for the championship game in Statesboro, Georgia, at the home of Georgia Southern. That was where the title game was that year. They lost to Youngstown State 25-17. Herd led 17-6 in the fourth quarter. Just could not hold them off. So despite the fact that they lost the championship game, they had an 11-win season. Michael Payton, another big year. Troy Brown comes in as a junior college transfer. Troy Brown's just in a category of his own for football. Mike Bartram coming on. I mean, Orlando Hatchett at running back. I mean, they had a lot of good players, and you could see that, man, they were really close. They really should have won that national title. They just did not finish the game well. They were up 11 points in the fourth quarter, so they were very close. But talk about those first two seasons a little bit, because there's a lot there for sure.
No, yeah, there's tons here because I was looking at 1990, like you were mentioning, and it's just unbelievable how close this team was from turning the corner right out of the gate.
Yeah.
You know, they lost to number 11 Citadel 10-21. That's a close loss. You mentioned Georgia Southern 14-17. That's a close loss. Another close one against Chattanooga 23-29. And then you mentioned Eastern Kentucky. At the time that they were playing, Marshall actually was ranked number 18 in the country. And Eastern Kentucky was number 1 in the country. I mean, this is the best team in all of what we would now call FCS football that came into Huntington at Fairfield Stadium. And the final game there, 12-15 loss, just a heartbreaker. So, you know, you look at some of these, you know, games, it's really interesting because, you know, there was some sad, tragic losses, but still yet they were able to beat number 4 Furman at home, which jumped them way up in the polls. So they went from being completely unranked to number 9 in the country. That's as far up that they went in the overall rankings in 1990, and as low as 18 too. So I mean, just, you know, they were able to spend a couple weeks in the top 25. That's something that, you know, just wasn't necessarily the norm. Of course, you know, like we said, Chop did a good job, different things, but still being in that conversation. Even at the 6-5 season, it showed there's a lot of promise. It showed that there is a lot of things to be excited about and be hopeful about heading into the 1991 season. And, you know, the kind of the transition between 1990 to 1991 is interesting to me because it's almost like it was a shedding of skin in a lot of different ways. You know, you say goodbye to Fairfield Stadium, which of course was an emotional moment because you look back throughout the history of just Marshall football, that Fairfield, it's historic, but it's also a place of a lot of tragedy. You know, of course, we think about the 75 and different things, the memorial services that were taking place there all those years ago. And so, I mean, there's a lot of very strong memories. And then after that, the win against Xavier, man, what a great time, what a great moment in all of Marshall sporting history that they were able to see there. And then moving on, you saw a lot of just bad football, right? Year after year, losing season after losing season, 3 wins, 2 wins, and just really tough time in all of Marshall's history throughout the 70s, especially. So, you know, whenever you transition into this brand new year of 1991, you say goodbye to a stadium that served you well for a long time, like you said, 60 plus years. And now you're saying hello to a brand new state-of-the-art Joan C. Edwards Stadium, holds 30,000 people whenever it first was constructed. And what a difference. You know, you see a shedding of skin, not just in, wow, a fancy new stadium, but the level of talent and the level of play from that point onward, even today, it's completely different. It's like a switch was flipped, and Marshall football was never going to be the same once the Joan came into existence. And again, looking at the 1991 season, I mean, just it's hard to beat it. It really is. You know, Marshall. This is also an interesting stat to me. Throughout Jim Donnan's career, Marshall would finish second in the Southern Conference almost every single year, with the exception of one. And that just boggles the mind. And another thing that boggles my mind too is just the overall difficulty that they had against Appalachian State. Like almost every single season, Jim Donnan, his teams could not beat App State, and that's just so annoying because of, you know, they're a rival, different things, but you know that was just kind of neither here nor there. But you know, losing to App State there on the road 3-9, just a really difficult loss. But then kind of bouncing back, the first ever game at the Joan against New Hampshire, number 8 New Hampshire at that, as Marshall was ranked number 14. And winning that by 1 point. You know, I'm looking at literally right now in my room here, the program from the very first game. You know, my dad passed that down to me, has tickets in there and different things too. So that's pretty cool memorabilia. And so that's awesome. But, you know, like you said, 33,000 plus people in attendance for that game, standing room only. You know, that was never heard of before at Fairfield Stadium. You'd never see a crowd like that whatsoever. So, you know, that's a lot of excitement right there. That's a big deal. And you move down, some fantastic wins this season. They blew out Morehead State 70-11. Brown 46-0, just unbelievable. And then this was a huge win on the road against Furman, who was number 2 at the time, 38-35, got the win there. And so, man, that's a huge win. And, that's an emotional moment. Of course, beating a top 5 team, that's always going to be an emotional moment. And you see this happen with a lot of teams. After an emotional moment, the very next season is always upset alert. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily upset alert because you're going to NC State, 1A at the time, number 11 in the country, Carter Finley Stadium, big place, 41,000 plus in attendance, and you lose that game by 1 point. Man. And as you said, I've heard the same sentiment. I heard the refs were not helping Marshall by any means in that particular game, but still just a really deflating loss. And then you move on to Chattanooga the very next week, and you lose to them, which is kind of a head-scratcher. Chattanooga wasn't very good at the time. But from that point on, Marshall turned it on. They won almost every single game except there at the end. They won out the regular season, beat Western Illinois first round, beat Northern Illinois second round, beat Eastern Kentucky third round, which they were ranked number 2 at the time. So you're thinking, man, they're setting themselves up for, a great finish. They may win this thing. And they head down to Statesboro to play, the way that they did this back in the day was they would have the bids. Different teams would have bids to host the national championship. And before Marshall, created Jones C. Edwards Stadium, it was kind of all over the place. Georgia Southern won that bid, and so in front of really an abysmal crowd. And we're going to find this to be the truth in the next couple seasons whenever it's played at the Joan. What a fantastic crowd that we would see. But, like 12,000 people were there. And you played at that neutral site against a tough Youngstown State team led by Jim Tressel, who is really going to be the Achilles heel, except for the exception of 1 year of Marshall. You lose 17-25, but still, this team won 6 games the year prior, and now you're sitting at 11 wins, 4 losses. I mean, that's awesome. That's a dream. Yeah. You barely lost to NC State as well. That would have been a fantastic win. So if I'm a Marshall fan in this season and I'm riding high, this is great because even all of your star players are young. They're coming back. And it goes back to what I was saying. It was a shedding of skin from 1990 to 1991. This was going to be a new president of Marshall football. It would never be the same after the 1991 season. Because of the success that they found in that year, because of the new stadium, because of the leadership of Jim Donnan and his recruits that he was able to bring in, it was never going to be the same. And that was for the better. And this is really where we start to see the shift in where we will become the most winning team of the 90s. Is even at the end of a disappointment of not winning a national championship, it was a great, I guess you could say, taste of what was to come, of the overall success this program was going to have very, very soon.
No doubt about it. And I like your point there about the fact that he really did, at that point, he was bringing in a different caliber of athlete that Marshall had probably never seen before. It was just different. I mean, you just knew it was. It wasn't hard to tell. I mean, so many of those guys ended up playing in the NFL. I mean, that pretty much says it all. And like you said, despite the fact that they didn't win the national title in 91, that was a great team. And they had everybody coming back, essentially everybody coming back for the next year. And these next 2 years that we get into, very, very much success to talk about here as well. And it doesn't all get really any better than 92. The 92 Marshall team goes 12-3. They win their first ever national championship. First ever natty, and this is, at that point, 22 years since the plane crash. Just the fact that they were able to come back to that magnitude probably blew a lot of people's minds, because there were so many years where Marshall was just abysmal in football. And the fact that you could see the progress building, and now it's finally reached its apex. It was just special stuff. I would have loved to have been around for that. But looking at the 92 season a little bit closer, they had a 3-0 start, all games pretty much non-competitive. But then they did go on the road at Missouri and lose 44-21. But that's not that's Missouri. That's a different level that we were at that point. So not that surprising. And then we had 3 more wins in a row after that before a 38-30 loss at Western Carolina, which didn't really look up how Western Carolina was that year. So that might have been an upset there that we lost that one. Then we had another really close loss. Again, you just talked about it, at or against Appalachian State, 37-34. We just could not get past them a whole lot during that era. 2 straight wins after that to go 8-3 in the regular season, made the playoffs, had all the games at home. First round was against Eastern Kentucky, a 44-10 win over them in round 1. Round 2, 35-21 win over Middle Tennessee. Semifinal round, 28-7 over Delaware, big win. And then the national championship game against Youngstown State, probably the arguably greatest game, one of the 2 or 3 greatest games in Marshall history. Opened up a big lead in this game, and Youngstown came back and they tied it up 28-28. And you were thinking, oh no, we've seen this story before. But then, you get the game-winning field goal from Willie Merrick, who had never attempted a field goal in his life. His brother had been suspended recently before that. He comes in and he hits the game-winning chip shot field goal with the last few seconds. Troy Brown officially solidifies it with an interception at the very end as well, like their last play of the game. So it was just amazing. An amazing moment, 31-28 win. National champions. I mean, at that point, I could not even imagine what people were thinking. Like you said, all the trials and tribulations that program had been through, to see them get to that point would have been something special. Michael Payton, as a senior, goes out winning the Walter Payton Award, the equivalent of the 1AA Heisman. Troy Brown, the 2 years he was there, great seasons for him. Ended up getting drafted by New England and had a New England Patriots Hall of Fame career. 3 Super Bowls. So just amazing player, amazing talent at that point that they had. And this 92 started the streak of 5 straight seasons in which the Joan hosted the 1AA National Championship game, 92-96. It hosted it every year, whether it was Marshall or not. And it just happened to be Marshall more times than not. So 92 was a great year. 93, another great year. But unfortunately, this time they did not quite win the national title. They were runners-up again, and we'll get to that. They had a 3-0 start before another seemingly strange loss to Chattanooga. We've talked about that, 33-31 loss to Chattanooga. They beat VMI the next week, 51-0. And then they had another game at NC State. I don't know why we kept playing NC State at that point, but another close loss, 24-17 loss at NC State. And then they go on a streak of 4 straight wins after that before losing 17-3 at Furman. And then they close out the year with a win over Western Carolina to go 8-3, another 8-3 regular season. And then the playoffs, they go on a tear again. 28-14 win over Howard in round 1, 34-31 over Delaware in round 2, and then 24-21 over Troy State in the semis. And Troy State at that point was actually, I believe, number 1 ranked team in 1AA football. So that was a great win. And then they get back to the title game again to play Youngstown State again at the Joan. But this time Youngstown State gets the better of us. They beat us 17-5, very strange score. So that was unfortunate there. But, man, the fact that they were getting to the title game that consistently was just crazy. And then that was also the year that Jim Donnan's son, Todd, comes in and lights it up at quarterback. He wins Southern Conference Offensive Player of the Year. They also had a guy named Chris Parker who started coming on at this time. And Chris Parker only holds pretty much every running back record that there is in Marshall history. He was coming on at this time. He was just a legend of a player for Marshall. So you could see that the talent was not dropping off whatsoever, despite they lost a lot of guys from 92. So talk about those 92 and 93 years there.
Well, 92 is just one of those teams that we look back upon that is just – it's one of the most legendary, if not the most legendary teams of all time at Marshall. You mentioned it, Michael Payton, Walter Payton Award winner, now College Football Hall of Famer, Troy Brown, all-time Marshall legend, went on to be one of the best receivers in New England Patriot history. Mike Bartram, one of the best receivers in
Mm-hmm.
Marshall history, also went on to the NFL, played with the Eagles. Chris Parker, as you mentioned, was on that team as a freshman, didn't play a ton, but still was on there. Billy Lyons, also an NFL talent. A lot of people, and I was just looking at the deep dive. A guy named Chad O'Shea was I think third string quarterback at the time, and he went on to be an NFL coaching, kind of just very long term. He's right now still with the Chiefs as a wide receivers coach. So just kind of an
Wow.
interesting bit of information. So a lot of football knowledge came from this team overall. And, you mentioned App State they're just the Achilles heel, man. And that's why I think that we have such a good rivalry now, because they were that annoying. You know what I mean? Like, Marshall was better than them. They just were. We were a better team. We should have won those games, but we didn't. And so they're just always in the back of your mind. So, you have the most legendary football game maybe ever in all of Marshall history, with the national championship after the run of the playoffs at Marshall. You have all of these guys on this team that are just absolute legends. You have Willie Merrick, who, like you mentioned, never kicked a field goal before in a game. And the only field goal he kicked was just, no big deal for the national championship. Not a huge deal, just another day at the office, right? But
Right.
I've watched that game many times on, YouTube, different things. I know that a lot of other people have as well. And I know people, whenever you ask, what are the top 5 greatest Marshall football games ever, you'll hear Notre Dame and you'll hear, other stuff. And everybody says, well, number 1's Xavier. And I understand. I get it. It was a huge win, a huge moment. But, for me, having that documented, having the entire game that is accessible to watch, and just the call too from those that were in the booth that day was just legendary. Willie Merrick for the national championship, he got it. So it's just a legendary win, and a team that really just we finally reached the mountaintop. Whenever they made the decision back in the 70s to continue to have a football team after the plane crash, that was the hope. That was not the expectation. We desired, man, maybe one day we could make it, and that would be great. But that's not really the point. We want to have this football team. We want to honor the guys that passed on. We want to make sure that football continues on in this community. But, man, that would be great if we ever made it to seeing that national championship come home. And I can't imagine what it was like for being a fan during that time that was able to live through the 70s. I think about my father, of course. He was just a young kid in elementary school whenever the plane crash happened, loved Marshall all the way. And he went to the majority of these games. There's very rare occasions where he would miss a football game, from what I understand. And he saw the worst of the worst. And to finally see that culminate into not just making it to a national championship, although that was enough. Most fans were like, man, we're just happy to be here because we're not even supposed to have a football program. But to win it, what a feeling that must have been. And what a just I can't even begin to imagine how awesome it was to see all of that take place, storming the field, taking the goalposts down for the first time, finishing your season on a win, just a magical moment, and that we'll never forget. And of course, here I wasn't even thought about back in 1991 or 92, so but looking back as a fan, that's just a moment that has to be one of the greatest moments that has ever taken place in all of football history here at Marshall. And as you mentioned, then you go forward, how do we go forward from this? Because, you come off the highest of highs. Well, 1993 wasn't really a terrible, sequel. I'll be honest with you. You lose a lot of talent. You do. You lose Michael Payton. He's your leader. He's your guy that was kind of, as he goes, the rest of the team goes. But Todd Donnan really is one of those guys in Marshall history that I think is overlooked, and I don't understand why. I don't really know why we don't necessarily look at him as fondly as Michael Payton does. He doesn't have quite the same stats that he did, but he's not far off.
Yeah.
And the story of it all is just really fascinating to me too. The son of the coach comes in and he lights it up. I mean, he's the leader of the team and doing fantastic things. So what was supposed to be a year of transition for Marshall, we got new guys coming in to fill in these spots, ended up being another fantastic year where they were able to once again make the national title game. And as you mentioned, they're playing against Youngstown State once again. It's a tough loss. You hate to see it. You hate to see, how all things kind of turned out there. But realistically, if I'm a Marshall fan, the last 3 seasons, you've made it to 3 straight national title games, and 2 of them have been on your home field. Like, that is a dream. That is a
Yeah.
dream come true. That is something to which I don't really think that the fan base understood when they had it. And we didn't really fully get it until things started to kind of drop off in 2004, 2005, and so on. But that was just a fantastic couple of seasons, even in spite of the loss there in '93. Still being in the title game, being in that contention, it showed the country, hey, the Jim Donnan led team here, we're not a fluke.
Right.
This is not just like, it wasn't like the 80s where you're going to make it and then for the next 5 seasons, maybe not make it again, maybe get bounced in the first or second round. No, this was, hey, we are legit. This is our 3rd season being here. We are a powerhouse. We are one of the greatest teams that it's in what we would call now the FCS level 1AA at the time. So it was definitely those 2 years were the solidifying that Marshall was for real, that they were going to be a team that was going to last long term.
No question about it. They had paid their dues, they had waited, and they were finally in a position to where they were a top dog. I mean, there's no question about it. They had a different level of talent, like we've talked about, that they had never had before. They had a different level of coaching that they had probably never had before. It was just different, and you could see it playing out right before your eyes. So, yeah, despite the fact that they were in 3 of those national title games and lost 2 of them, I don't think anybody was truly that disappointed. I mean, yeah, you would have obviously, you're disappointed when you lose, but long term, you still knew, okay, this is a dominant program. Like, you knew that they were. And then the last 2 years, much like those other 2 years we just talked about, his last 2 years with the Herd, top notch again. But there was one thing missing each year, and we'll get to that. But looking at '94, this was a big year for the Herd. They end up winning, at least tying for the Southern Conference title. First time since '88 that they had at least tied for the Southern Conference title. They go 12-2. 12-2 is a heck of a year. And they had only lost 2 games in the regular season. Started out 7-0, and they were all just, I remember looking at the scores. They were just beating the brakes off of everybody. I mean, dominant team. 7-0 start, but then guess who? App State beats us 24-14. So they were 7-1, and then they have 3 straight wins to close out the regular season to go 10-1. I'm sorry, they only lost 1 game in the regular season. So 10-1. Closest win, I wrote this down. Their closest win in the regular season was 12 points. Every other win was at least 12. That's dominance. Todd Donnan, again, Southern Conference Offensive Player of the Year. They have a great chance to get back to the title game. Round 1, they throttled Middle Tennessee 49-14. Second round, they had a very close overtime win over James Madison, 28-21. And then in the semifinal round, though, you got to go all the way out to Boise on the blue turf. You play Boise State. Herd is up 24-7 at the half, but unfortunately, Boise State closes the game out with 21 unanswered points, wins it 28-24. So the Herd season ends in the semifinal round. This is the first time since 90 that they hadn't been in a championship game. So that was probably a weird feeling at that point, especially knowing you had a big lead on them and you just let it slip. But I mean, so despite the fact that they did not get to the championship game, they did win a Southern Conference title. So that has to count for a lot because those didn't come around that often. So again, a 12-2 year, it's hard to be upset about that. And then 95 was another big year and had a very, very interesting situation arise this year that would set up the future of Marshall football for the foreseeable future. 95, 12-3 record overall. And again, you are national runner up. And we'll get to that because it was a big talking point and it led to a huge thing the next year in 96. But looking at 95, you start out the year at their first game of the year, another game against NC State. I don't know why we played them so much at that point, but we lose that game 33-16 at NC State. 5 straight wins after that before a 10-3 loss at Appalachian State. Just could not beat them for anything at that point. Don't know what that was, but then they end up with 4 straight wins in the regular season. They go 9-2. Of course, you get back to the championship. You get back to the playoffs to get to that title game. And then the first round against Jackson State, the Herd wins 38-8. Second round against Northern Iowa. These are all home games. You win. Well, actually, no, the third round was not, but the second round was 41-24 win against Northern Iowa. Third round, semifinal round, you're at McNeese State, who was a very good team at that point. Marshall beats them 25-13. And then you get back home for the championship game against Montana. And Montana beats us at the very end on a game-winning field goal in the last few seconds, 22-20, just a heartbreaking loss, absolute heartbreaker. And the quarterback situation that year would take a drastic turn for eventually great things, because I was reading a lot of this in the reading material I was talking about that I was trying to catch up on some of this older stuff. So at that point, Jim Donnan had a very high hopes for a guy by the name of Larry Harris at quarterback. But unfortunately, Larry Harris suffered a career-ending knee injury in week 2 of 95 season. Mark Zaban comes in after that, which we know the name Zaban, of course. He starts after that, but then he gets injured. So after Mark Zaban goes down, you start a guy by the name of Chad Pennington as a true freshman, and he starts the rest of the way. And he had some horrible games. He had one game where he threw 6 interceptions, and they still managed to win the game. So he was a freshman, and you could tell he was a freshman. He was not a polished guy whatsoever. You knew he had a lot of growing to do. But that kid leads Marshall all the way to the championship game and nearly gets the win if Montana wouldn't have got that field goal at the very end there. So you knew at that point Chad Pennington was the future, and obviously that was the case. And then after this season, the rumor mill of Jim Donnan leaving for a bigger program, that was taken off like gangbusters. Huge, huge, huge stuff there. And on Christmas Day, 1995, he agrees to become the new head coach at the University of Georgia of the SEC. And at that point, I'm kind of surprised they kept him as long as they did. I mean, 6 years for a coach that had won that much, that was kind of miraculous at the 1AA level to keep a guy like that. So he goes from coaching in the Southern Conference to coaching in the SEC. So that tells you that a lot of people were looking at him. And unfortunately, we had to go out and get a new coach, but turned out all right. A guy by the name of Pruitt did a pretty good job for us. So yeah, that was quite the run we were on there in the 90s. So talk about the last 2 years of Jim Donnan there, 94, 95.
Well, you mentioned it. It's more of the same. Just dominant football. 1994 too, something that is good to remember is Marshall actually came into the season ranked number 1 in the entire country, and they played like it. I mean, as you mentioned, they just blew people out. It wasn't close. Morehead State, week number 1, 71-7. West Virginia State, they played 48-0. It's just one blowout win after another. So, this was definitely a fantastic team. Appalachian State, losing to them just makes no sense. I hate it. They're annoying. And I hope that we beat them in the honor of this entire 90s era this year.
Yeah.
But, you go on the road to Boise State, and that is that's just tough. I'm looking at this. I don't really know why. Maybe somebody that's listening could kind of educate us, but Boise State was ranked lower than Marshall. They were ranked number 3. Marshall was number 2 at the time. And I'm kind of confused about the seeding. I don't know how they would have been higher. But anyway, going out west on the road, and Boise State's always going to be a tough place to play no matter what era, too. I mean, they're just a good football historical program. But, losing to them in the semis, that definitely was a different feeling. Of course, Marshall, now if I'm a fan, I mean, I've been national championship so many times. I'm like, I don't really care about the semifinal. Get me to the national championship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to lose that game, I'm sure was a little different, very strange. However, it is what it is. And then, moving on to that next season, the final season of Jim Donnan, 1995, as you mentioned, it was very interesting because you had another transition now. This was the third time to where you're changing quarterbacks. You go from Michael Payton to Donnan, now Donnan to, the third string quarterback and Chad Pennington. Yeah. And my dad, I remember him telling me, you mentioned, that he was third string, different things. He remembered Mark Saban, whenever he did get in, was, he's a pretty decent quarterback. And, there's a lot of hope that he would actually be able to be a decent player and kind of be a good game manager for Marshall all the way through and hopefully get him to a national championship. But whenever he went down, you're like, oh, no, what are we going to do? We're running out of players at this point. And so Chad Pennington comes in. He played like a true freshman. There's lots of, like you mentioned it, there's lots of bad games there that first season. And it's, again, really interesting because the next year he'd be humble enough to redshirt and stick around with the program, even whenever he didn't have to. And that's just something you would never see in college football today. I mean, you no longer have those stories at all. So really interesting story. But that year, Chris Parker actually would end up breaking the all-time rushing record. The team, although the offense kind of sputtered at times, they were just so good as a team that they could squeeze out 12 wins in a season. I mean, that's just how good of a program this team was, and also make it to a national championship. So, losing to Montana State too, that's a rough way to go out to finish out, because now you've only won one national championship while being in so many others, and that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. So sad way to end it, but no matter what, it was still just a fantastic time, a fantastic time for being a Marshall football fan. And the job that Jim Donnan did, it cannot be understated, just what he did for this place. Not only did he win, but he won the right way, and he defined what it was to win the Marshall way. And so that was the most exciting portion of football that we have ever seen here. And it was all thanks to the leadership of that man, Jim Donnan. Didn't matter. I mean, he, like we said, he went through 3 different correlations of teams, I guess you could say, and different recruits, and was still able to find fantastic success every single season. So hats off to Jim.
No doubt about it. And this makes the third, and we'll talk about this next week. We'll talk about even beyond farther back than Jim Donnan. We'll talk about some other coaches and a lot of them, actually. We'll get into a lot of that older stuff. But this makes this, at this point, this was the third consecutive Marshall head football coach that left for a bigger job. So you knew at that point Marshall had quality coaches. You knew that they did. I mean, Sam Parrish goes to Kansas State, does not have much success there, but he went there. And then George Chomp ends up going to Navy, and Jim Donnan goes to Georgia. So it doesn't get a whole lot bigger than going to Georgia to be the head coach. So, it's hard to fault him for doing that. I mean, you're going from a 1AA, not even a 1A. You're going from a 1AA school, and it's not like you have to start out in the MAC or the Mountain West or whatever. You go to the SEC immediately. So it's hard to say no to that. I mean, that would have been a foolish decision to say no to that. So of course he was going to do that eventually. At 6 years, like I said, it was kind of miraculous they kept him for 6 years. But I'm glad that they did, because he had an unbelievable run, absolutely unbelievable run for Marshall. Really set up Pruitt, really sitting pretty there from 96 onwards. 96, we've talked about it already. Their last year in 1AA, they go 15-0, just railroad everybody, beat the living breaks off everybody, wins a national championship, gets revenge on Montana. So that was all because Jim Donnan left a lot of great players. Now, Moss had a little bit to do with that in 96, but most of those players were Jim Donnan players. So can't say anything else except the fact that he did amazing stuff for Marshall. And let's talk a little bit about it right now. I want to go over some of these overall numbers before we get into our grade for his overall tenure. So he has at Marshall in 6 years, he has a 64-21 overall record at 75%. I believe only second in program history behind Bob Pruitt's 80% winning percentage. So right there with him, just neck and neck there. He has 5 1AA playoff appearances. He has 3 1AA championship game appearances, 1 national title in 92, 1AA coach of the year in 92 and 95. He had 5 straight 11-plus win seasons, which was absolutely unheard of, never been done before. I don't think it's not been done since. So that's a one-time shot. 5+, obviously you're playing playoff games. That's going to help. But 11+ win seasons in 5 straight years is unheard of, unprecedented for Marshall. He had several All-American players at that point. Mike Bartram in 92, Troy Brown in 91 and 92, B.J. Cohen in 95. B.J. Cohen was a dominant force, and he ended up being a dominant force in 97 in the MAC for Pruitt as well. Melvin Cunningham, 95, dominant defensive player for Marshall. Billy Lyons, like you said, Michael Payton. All these guys are legendary players. And the fact that a lot of these guys did get to translate to 1A football, Mid-American Conference football, and they were that good shows how truly good those players were. Because, yeah, it's one thing to be good at the 1AA level and all that, but if you can go to the 1A level and be that good, you're just a great football player. And most of these guys were able to do that, or a lot of these guys were. So absolutely awesome to see the level of talent he was bringing in, no doubt about it. A few other points I wrote down. He capitalized. Now, we talked about the fact that he set up Pruitt for big success, but he was able to capitalize on the momentum that was started by Stan Parrish and George Chomp. And they had started doing really good things for Marshall. Like I said, those two guys ended up going to bigger jobs because they had success at Marshall in the mid to late 80s. And Jim Donnan is the one that took the program to an elite level. Bob Pruitt's the one that took it to its apex, but Jim Donnan's the one that really first took them to an elite level, because before that they had gotten to the title game in 87, but they really weren't consistently elite yet. But when Jim Donnan got there from 91 through 95, they were consistently elite every single year. He recruited just a different type of athlete, like we've said. And I even wrote down the fact that this guy, I just wrote down what he did at Georgia just because it kind of blows my mind how that whole thing went. At Georgia, as the head coach of an SEC program who has very high expectations, Jim Donnan goes in, and in 5 years, he comes out with a 40-19 overall record and 25-15 in the SEC. That is nothing to sneeze at, and especially given the fact that he had only been a head coach at that point, obviously only at the 1AA level. So he made a jump from going from the 1AA level to the highest level of college football. And in 96 at Georgia, he goes 5-6. In 97, he goes 10-2 with an Outback Bowl win and a number 10 final ranking. In 98, he goes 9-3 with a Peach Bowl victory and a number 14 final ranking. 99, he goes 8-4 with another Outback Bowl and a number 16 final ranking. And then in 2000, he goes 8-4 with an Oahu Bowl victory and a number 20 final AP ranking. And they fire the man, which is just crazy to see someone get fired with that much success and those high of expectations. They're out through the roof there at Georgia, obviously. He has 4 straight bowl wins, 4 straight top 25 finishes. He wins 67% of his games, and he wins, I don't even know what the percentage is of SEC games, but he goes 25-15 in the SEC. So he did a great job at Georgia. And, it no doubt helps propel him into eventually the College Football Hall of Fame, where he goes into it in 2009. So overall, as a head coach at Marshall and Georgia, that being 11 total seasons, he goes 104-40 as a head coach. I mean, he was an amazing head coach, did so many great things, and he definitely deserved the Hall of Fame induction that he got in 09, no doubt about it. Before we close it all out, we got to give a grade for the overall era. And I know this was a big talking point that we had before we even started recording, is where was this grade going to go? Because there's a lot that you could make a case for a very, very high grade. You could even make a case for possibly the highest grade that we've given out so far for these coaches. But I'm not going to give any spoilers yet. So go ahead and give me your grade. And let's hear what you got.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this kind of all day because it's difficult to try and rank them. You look at it and you see that the most negative thing that the guy did is he didn't win all of the national championships that he was in.
Right.
That's the only gripe that we've got.
Right.
And App State too. That was annoying. But no coach has ever done what he has done. Bob Pruitt was very close, but even he did not do everything. Of course, the level of competition was different, and everybody can argue would Michael Payton and all those guys translate to the MAC and all the different things that they were a part of, and so that's a great argument, and that's a great thing to think about. But truthfully, when I look at Marshall, when I look at how he left Marshall after he was finished, after his tenure was done, and the success that the program continued to have post his career, I really do not think that you could have done a better job than what Jim Donnan did here. And so, might be controversial to some, but I'm going to give him the highest grade that I've ever given a coach. That's A+. A+.
Nice.
You could not do, I don't think, anything more other than win a couple more national championships than what Jim Donnan did here at Marshall. In those days, people did not understand how good they had it as fans, because he literally transformed this place. He literally created the culture that we were able to enjoy with Pruitt and whatnot, and all the big names, the Heisman hopefuls and whatnot. But Jim Donnan started it, and so I'm giving him an A+ because I just don't think that you could do a better job than what he did here at Marshall.
I don't think you could either. And I love the way you put that, because the gripe that we have, the only gripe you really have with the man is he didn't win more national titles. I mean, that's like Nick Saban stuff. Like, Alabama fans are probably sitting there thinking, oh man, I wish Saban would have won a couple more titles. It's like, okay, if that's what you have to complain about, you had it pretty dang good. So, but with that being said, my grade, I went with a flat A. And the reason I went with a flat A is because, ironically, the thing we're talking about, if he would have just won, I'm not even saying if he won all those titles. If he just wins one more of those titles, I'm giving him an A+, no doubt about it. I think if he even wins 95, if he wins 93, if he wins 91, I'm giving him an A+. And actually, now that I mentioned that, I think I mentioned earlier that he had 3 title game appearances. It was 4. It was 91, 92, 93, and 95. So I misspoke there. 4 title game appearances. So yeah, I don't know. That's really the only. That's a pretty good gripe to have. That's a good problem to have. I think that's a big thing in life. Is I always like to look at things. That's a good problem to have, and that is a great problem to have. You didn't win more national championships. I mean, you were a dominant team, 11+ win team, 5 straight seasons or whatever. I mean, just amazing stuff. And the fact that he was able to win as much as he did in the SEC says that it wasn't just a 1AA thing. He was just that good of a coach. So I'm giving him an A. That is tied with Pruitt's A that I gave him. But there's no question in my mind, and I said this before we started recording, Jim Donnan left Bob Pruitt far, far more to work with than Bob Pruitt left Mark Snyder to work with. So in that regard, you could almost make the argument, that he did do more things for the program than Pruitt did. And I know it's a different level. It's 1AA compared to 1A, and Pruitt just took him to unbelievable heights at the 1A level. But Donnan left him some major success to lean on, and there's no question about it. So It was an amazing time. It would have been an amazing time to have been a fan. Just seeing all those extra home games every year would have been awesome. I mean, you would have had at that point, you probably would have had 10 plus home games every year because you hosted so many of those games. I mean, that would have been a crazy time. But with that being said, that I think that pretty much covers all of what we needed to talk about there. You can just, if you want to give any final thoughts on Jim Donnan and his successes he had at Marshall, you can go ahead and give it now. But other than that, I think we're pretty much done.
Well, one thing I do wish that we could be able to see more of is Jim Donnan, just period. He's an older man now, 81 years old, and it's really weird. Of course, he got fired at Georgia, but he stayed close with the program. Like, he left on good terms. Everybody was cool with each other. And he's kind of set up shop there in Athens, and he's still, even today, close with the program, lives down there, supports them majorly. And I really do wish that we were able to see him more often. I wish that, and if Gerald Harrison's listening, a great thing, a good bit of fan service would be to try and maybe honor that national championship team, or really just his entire tenure here. I know that he's been inducted into the Marshall Hall of Fame and different things, and so we've given him his flowers and whatnot. But what a cool thing it would be to have like a day where it's kind of like a legacy day where we brought in really all of those old coaches that made a difference here. Like we brought Bob Pruitt back in, which it wouldn't be hard. He's now a native of here, and maybe brought back Jim Donnan, and just kind of recognize them, let the fans see them, let them wave and all that good stuff. I think that'd be very, very cool. But I understand. He spent a lot of time down in Athens, Georgia, too. Probably had a really good time. Like you said, never had a losing season in the SEC to one of the best college football teams ever. I mean, that's pretty good stuff. And I'm sure he's treated really, really well down there. So, but one thing, though, I do hope that we see before, he inevitably will pass on one day because he is an older man, is to see him back at the Joan one more time, and where we're able to just recognize and remember his greatness once again. But, the career of Jim Donnan, when I look at it on paper, he's right there neck and neck with Pruitt. I can see the argument for both of them being the best of all time here. But truthfully, I give the edge to being the greatest of all time to Jim Donnan. That's my humble opinion.
I mean, you can't really argue with it either way, honestly. I mean, I don't really care how you look at it. I think if you ask any Marshall fan that's even semi-knowledgeable about Marshall or Marshall history, they're going to say they're 1 and 2 all time. I mean, you've got other guys, you've got Cam Henderson. We're going to talk about him next episode. You better believe that. We got Cam Henderson. We've got Doc Holliday, did amazing stuff for a lot of years for Marshall. I mean, you've got a lot of guys. You talked about Parrish and Chomp and the other guys that had success, but man, none were on that level. I mean, none were quite, and especially for that length of time, because they weren't there nearly as long as Donnan or Pruitt. Donnan was there 6 years. Pruitt was there 9 years. So, you got a 15-year period where Marshall football probably averaged at least 10 to 11 wins a season, probably on average. I mean, that's just special, absolutely special stuff. And I love your sentiment about bringing him back for more. That would be amazing. They need to bring him back because, I know there's been some stuff where he's popped in and out for team recognizing the anniversary of a team or a championship. And he's done that a couple times I know of, but they need to bring him back more consistently. I'd love to see his name somewhere, on something for Marshall football, as an honoree of some sort, because wherever we are right now today as a program, wherever we have been since he was there, it's because of him. We wouldn't be where we are if it wasn't for Jim Donnan. And I think everybody would agree with that because he took Marshall to a different level. He didn't take them to, well, you can't really say he took them to their apex because it was 1AA, but at that level, he took them to their apex, and he got them to a point where Bob Pruitt could take them to their apex at the 1A level. That was because of Jim Donnan. So cannot deny that. But with that being said, we've wrapped it up this week, and next week we're going to get into a lot of I'm excited for this one next week because we go about a lot of coaches in the past. I mean, I'm talking like 1920s onwards. We're going deep, and I've been doing research for the last couple of days, and I've been looking up stuff, reading stuff, and some of that stuff is kind of mind-boggling. Some of that stuff kind of blows my mind. You know, we did not have a lot of success during those years from up until, you know, the mid 80s, late 80s, but there's a lot to tell about that era, and I think nobody talks about it because they weren't any good. But now I think it's important that we do talk about it. We're not going to be able to give every coach, you know, an hour-long synopsis. That's just not going to happen. We're going to just wrap it all up in one episode, you know, overall. But that's more than I would say most people would be willing to do. Not to toot our own horn, but I would say that. So with that being said, we look forward to that episode next week. Hopefully the softball team can get a big win against Arizona and see what they can do, in baseball as well. Hopefully they can do their thing. So with that being said, go Herd. We will see y'all next time.
Go Herd.